All right, thanks everybody for joining our webinar today. This is a talk that I've put together around the 6 keys to Agile transformation and what's kind of leading to success. Some of you, I see some familiar names. Some of you have seen me do some talks around the pitfalls and what to watch out for. I thought maybe it would be good to focus on the positive and how do we actually overcome those pitfalls. So this one's more about what do we need to do to be successful? What are the patterns that we've seen? I will be doing a little bit of polling along the way just to kind of get you guys engaged. And you see a link there for pollev.com/velocity. And a poll will come up, a fun poll will come up here in a second. I am David Hawks with Agile Velocity, founder, CEO, executive Agile coach, certified Scrum trainer, all those good things that you see on there. My passion is for helping organizations who are embarking on their Agile journey or on their second transformation, or but like trying to get through and actually achieve the benefits and the results that that agility promises. There's still probably more bad Agile than there is good Agile, and every enterprise we go into today, no matter the size, is not on their first Agile transformation. So we'll talk a little bit about that and how we overcome that today. All right, so let's jump in. Number 1, first key to success is what I call business outcomes are the goal. We see too many. I think the number 1 problem with transformations is that folks are oriented around the wrong thing, that they're oriented on trying to implement all of the things. And they're doing that in a pursuit of maybe a business outcome, like we want to deliver faster. But sometimes we see that you go into an organization and we say, what's your why? And they say to implement SAFe, or to implement Scrum, or to do Agile. And that's not really the goal, right? So we have practices over there on the right, which are, all of our implementation frameworks: Scrum, Kanban, SAFe, DAD, LESS, Nexus, right? Scrum at scale. We've got an infinite number of practices available to us to choose from. And on the left, we could talk about the business outcomes that we want. The missing piece is, how do I connect the dots? How do I get from the business outcomes, and we need to orient around those, but it's, for a lot of people, it's hard, especially new people to Agile. It's hard to connect the dots of what are the things I actually need to do to achieve that. And because it's fuzzy, because it's a gray area, what we find is, well, the right is very specific. It's, the how is clear. So, as far as like, all right, the practices I, potentially need to do. So people just orient and focus too much on just the practices. And so what we've tried to do with Path to Agility is to connect the dots, to be able to, say, all right, what are the capabilities that those practices enable that would drive certain Agile outcomes, which would allow us to accomplish a business outcome that we have. So to give you an example, maybe our business outcome is we want to be more predictable, right? And we could say, well, having a practice of working in sprints might be something that would be good. We think, we have a hypothesis. If we work in Scrum and do sprints, then we'll be more predictable potentially. But if we just focus on doing sprints, I can have a team doing Scrum in 2 weeks, right? We could check all the boxes. We could say, you're a product owner, you're a Scrum master. We meet every day and do a daily Scrum. We do a sprint planning, we do a retro, check, check, check. We're doing Scrum. That doesn't mean that we're predictable, right? So if we just are trying to measure predictability, or we're just measuring the practices, we're missing something in the middle. So in order to get predictable, we may say, you know what, we need to shorten the quality feedback loop, right? Well, that's a capability that we could do by implementing practices like continuous integration and test automation. Or in order to get predictable, we need teams that are owning their work and breaking their work down, right? So the capability could be something like iterative planning. And teams are able to iteratively plan that we could do through Scrum or Kanban or anything like that. That would lead to teams are taking ownership of their work. That leads to more predictability, right? We've got to tie these things together. We've got to figure out how do we get, and more importantly, once we know what business outcomes, and that's our number one goal, like speed or predictability or market responsiveness or customer satisfaction. Once we know that, we could say, what's the minimum amount of changing of our practices we need to do in order to support that, as opposed to just implementing all of the things. So I'm going to ask you guys a question and see if you can add at that pollev.com/velocity. And I want to hear from you. What do you think is a bad transformation goal? What's a transformation goal maybe you've seen at your own organization? What's something that you've seen that is not a good goal, would be kind of the wrong thing for us to focus on? Changing culture as first priority, doing Agile, but not being Agile. What else? Let's see what else comes in. I posted the link in the chat again as well for those that just joined. All right. We see what else comes in. Implementing SAFe, yeah. And I've seen goals like this year we're going to launch 20 arts, right? Like that's, Agile release train from SAFe. And again, you could implement all those things, but not necessarily be any better, right? You could be as waterfall as you ever were, right? Carrying things over from one sprint to the next sprint. Focusing only on implementing new technologies, just doing all the Agile things, right? Yeah, making an IT only project and not involving the business. Yes, definitely. All of these are good, right? So we've got a bunch of things there, and what we want to focus on is more from a business outcome. So in Path to Agility, we've identified and rolled everything up to kind of these are the 9 core business outcome categories, if you will, that we see people are after, right? That kind of Agile promises, if you will. And so what we want to do is make sure and say, all right, this is an exercise you could take to your leaders and say, all right, pick 2 of these things. What are the top 2 things? And let's make that our goal, right? Again, business outcomes are the goal. And then once we identify, we say it's speed and predictability, then we can go, okay, what do we need in order to get to speed and predictability, right? And also clarify what's the clear objective. So sometimes we'll take these and then turn them into OKR. So what does that mean for us? What's the objective? What are the key results? How would we know that we're delivering faster? How are we going to measure that? And communicate that to everybody in the organization so everybody understands the why. Why is speed important? Why is predictability important? So that we're all aligned and motivated and kind of excited to try and in that pursuit, right? So that's the first thing we got to orient around. The second key is leaders have to lead the change. And I've kind of got a little bit of a history lesson here. So if we think back, when I first started doing Agile stuff, I wouldn't say it was good Agile, but when I first started doing Agile stuff in 2003-ish, I would call, at that time, we were doing what I call grassroots agility. It was actually mostly developer-led. Leaders didn't even know what the heck it was. And teams were kind of starting to embrace it as kind of a new way of working. And there was a lot of excitement around doing that. But it hit a ceiling really fast, right? Because if leaders aren't involved, well, it's not going to get very far in the organization. But we started learning, right? We started figuring things out. And then I think we went through a time period where everything was focused on the team, right? And we had full-blown transformations, even enterprise level transformations that were very team focused. And I think we did a real disservice to the leaders, because in that time period, what we did, I mean, I'm guilty of it as well as a coach. You know, I started actually yesterday, fun fact, yesterday was Agile Velocity's 10-year anniversary. So we started in 2010. And at that time, what we did, you know, as coaches, we were telling leaders everything that they couldn't, they shouldn't do anymore, right? We'd tell them, hey, you can't be in retros, you can't you can't give tasks to people, you don't get to set priorities, product owners do, right? And we're educating the leaders on everything that they're not supposed to do, and we did a terrible job of telling them what their new role was. So everything was focused on the team, and we started to get some more success, but again, we were still missing a couple layers in terms of that. And so then what started to shift in the back half of the decade was focusing on more what I call system level agility or cross team coordination. And this is when all of our scaling frameworks started to emerge, right? You know, and you know, SAFe and LESS and Nexus and everything else. And it's like, all right, all of a sudden we're doing system level agility, which we were getting more middle management engaged in trying to optimize the full value stream, optimize the whole, if you will. And that was better, right? And so that was like the next wave of transformation is like, all right, we did team level transformation, now we're doing system level. And while we could argue that we should have started with system level, I actually think that we needed to do team level for those leaders to be educated enough to understand how to apply it at the system. So I think it's just a natural evolution. And now we're entering into a period of what we call business agility, which we're starting to see now that we've done things at a middle management layer. Now the C-suite and the executives have enough of an understanding to start to see how could we apply this across the organization, right? And so we're seeing C-suite saying, well, how could we do Agile? How could that apply to our overall planning process, right? The Agile mindset in that perspective. And so that's, to me, the next frontier of where we're kind of evolving to, right? And so we've moved up the chain in terms of what leaders can do, and we're changing the paradigm of what what the role of a leader is, from kind of the old school micromanager, taskmaster type of person, to the keys for an Agile leader are we creating clear purpose? Are we creating focus, right? Which creating focus means saying no. I find most leaders are constantly triagers. Something comes in, they try and get it off their plate, they assign it to somebody else. Something comes in, they assign it to somebody else. And leaders need to be more protectors, right? Like they need to say, all right, I know you want all that stuff, but my team's already got their priorities and they're already full over there. And I'm going to block, and I'm going to help have clarity of focus, right? We're trying to get the team engaged, which gets into, do I as a leader have more coaching skills, right? Am I creating an environment for the team to thrive, creating things like psychological safety within the team? And then we talk about enabling decision agility, which is old school hierarchy. It would take too long for a decision to go up the chain and down the chain, right? And what we're talking about with Agile systems is that the decisions are being made where the people closest to the problem are able to make those decisions, right? So we're empowering and we're enabling those decisions. But in order to do that, they need to understand clear purpose and what we're trying to do, right? And so that all of these connections in terms of now, what does a leader need to focus on, and what do they need to do? Number three. So number three is what I call having a value-driven mindset. And I've got an exercise here for you guys to do. So on, oh, you've already, somebody's already jumped in there. Okay, so what you've got is a list of things. I think there's 10 on this list in the poll for you to be able to kind of upvote, you know, which are the ones that you think would be the most important for, you know, in terms of most important values in the way we manage our work. What are the things that we should do? So I think you get 3 votes, and we'll see what kind of shapes out of that. What are the most important things not how your company values them or demonstrates, but like you personally, what do you think are the three most important things, right? Okay, give it another few seconds to shake out here. All right. Okay, so looks like we've got three clear at the top emerging. So high team engagement, adjusting to higher priorities, and maximizing value. So we got to have our teams engaged. We've got to be able to respond, especially in today's times, right? You know, things are changing faster and faster. And ultimately maximizing value. I think that's our ultimate goal of a team, is to maximize value, right? That's why we exist. So when we break that down and we look at the overall 10 here, there we go. So I actually will add, so the three of them that you had are up there at the top. I also feel like value driven. So this is like, some people talk about a shift from project mindset to product mindset. That's the same type of thing we're talking about here, is being more, instead of being solely focused on executing the plan, we want to be more value focused on delivering as much value as possible, right? When we focus solely on executing the plan, we get lost in a really bad fundamental assumption. And the assumption, when we create a plan, you know, in a plan-driven mindset, what I feel like is we're going to build a plan and we're going to flawlessly execute it. Like, that's our goal. We put somebody in charge of it as the project manager, and your job is to make sure this plan gets flawlessly executed. And the issue is, in our world, we deal mostly with complex work where we don't have perfect inputs, right? We don't have a perfect set of requirements. It's not like building a house or, you know, building a bridge or something where, like, you know, you've done it before. We've done it for hundreds of years, laying concrete. We know how that works, right? So we deal in a world where we're solving new problems, we're designing new things, and we don't have a perfect input, and therefore we can't have a perfect plan to flawlessly execute. And what's more important is, you know, Agile, we talk about shortening the feedback loop, constant learning loops, right? And so it's about getting early market validation. It's about getting early ROI. It's about having team engagement, because we need all of their brains in order to maximize value. Right. And so these things are way more important than the old school kind of waterfall things that we see down at the bottom. So let's compare this notion of project or plan driven to product or value driven. So in a project or plan driven mindset, we're focused more on output, like just crank out a bunch of widgets. And if we are a manufacturing line and the bottleneck is just getting more widgets out so that we can sell them, then great. But that's not what most of us are involved in. The type of work is really about the outcome, right? And the value, and then testing it in the market and getting feedback and then iterating from there. Project or plan driven has much more of a push mentality. I'm going to assign people, you know, I'm going to grab this person, assign work to them, push work onto people, versus product or value driven is centered typically around more pull systems. Project or plan driven is about managing the execution of the plan, right? Assuming that it's in, you know, there's very little error in the plan, where product or value driven is more about managing scope and saying, all right, we're going to get 5 things done every 2 weeks, and whatever the next 5 highest priority things, and we're going to keep evolving our plan based on the information and the things that we learn along the way. Project or plan driven is centered very much funding models around a budget. And then if you think about that, what's the project manager's job? Is to spend the budget. So we typically do spend all the budget, as opposed to product or value driven would be, hey, we're going to invest, and you got to continually come back to kind of the well to say, hey, is this still worth investing in, or should we invest in other things, right? And making more investment decisions besides more budget accounting type of decisions. Project or plan driven, typically we see a lot more kind of like component teams, because again, it's like, all right, we have this perfect plan. The best way, the most efficient way to optimize is you guys go build your part, you guys go build your part, you guys go build all your part. And since we're all going to flawlessly execute, we'll just integrate it at the end and everything will work great. We know that doesn't really work in our world. So we talk about feature teams where we're putting all of those different skills on a team together because we got to interact and we got to learn faster. We can't do late integration in that way. We see a lot of temporary staffing in the project or plan driven world, right? Contract labor, outsourced, because again, they're not approaching it as a long-lived product. They're approaching it as a one-time spend, even if it's a 12-month or 2-year spend. And then at the end, that project's over, we'll just span this team. Well, the reality is we're building software products that are long-lived. Like the product is now in use. Who's going to support it? Who's going to enhance it? When we learn that some of the features we thought were great aren't great and they need to be enhanced, who's going to do that, right? So in product or value-driven, we talk more about having persistent teams, right? And consistent, those cross-functional dedicated teams. And again, that ties into that investment model. All these things kind of build on each other. So we see all of these different parts, right? And you probably can see, things in your organization, do we have more of the behavior on the left or do we have the behavior on the right, right? And some of these are some pretty big lift, right? To get from the left to the right. But that's, to me, for leaders and the organization as a whole, this is one of the biggest lifts that we have, right? Is to shift from getting a value-driven mindset. So that was number 3. So number 4 is what we call managing the change journey. And, because this isn't just a process, implementation, this is going to require organizational change management because we're changing behaviors, right? We talk about somebody put in the bad goals was like change the culture. Well, part of the reason why that's a bad goal is because culture is an outcome, right? Like culture is a result, right? You don't go change. It's like the thing that happens. Like you got to go change the behaviors, right? The behaviors have to shift for the culture to shift, right? And we got to go deeper into like, how would I switch behaviors? Well, I have to switch my mindset about things, which means the experiences and other things have to shift for my actions to change, for therefore it to become a repeatable behavior that then is impacting our culture. So you've got to break those things down, and you can't just think about this as, hey, we're just going to train everybody and then we'll be good. That comes from the old school kind of like plan-driven mentality that says, hey, we had a defined process and now we're just going to have a new defined process. But Agile isn't a defined process. It's an evolution of continuous improvement. So there is never an end state. So you can't define it up front and then just go implement it. And so what we've done with Path to Agility is taken your normal kind of change curve and said, the first thing we got to do is what we talked about with number 1, which was align around a mission, clear mission, business outcomes. We've got to create a learning culture in the organization, right? And that learning culture isn't just like good retrospectives at the team level, but that is also that we have a learning culture as an organization, and leaders are removing organizational impediments as they emerge and continuously, right? This isn't a 9-month endeavor and then we're perfect, right? Like we're never perfect. We've got to have this culture of how are we going to continuously improve, right? And we've got to take Agile adoption patterns, mix it in with organizational change management patterns to get to then a state of predictability, right? Predictability is about getting the variability out, not, hey, we know exactly what we'll deliver 6 months from now. But we got to get the variability out of the system so that we can then start to accelerate, right? Start to go faster and optimize for speed of delivery, optimize for faster time to value. And then ultimately, we're trying to get to an adaptable organization where we are able to sense and respond quickly with the market, right? We have an idea. It's not, hey, we have an idea, let's do a business case. Let's, get funding for $5 million. Let's go build something for 9 months. Then let's validate our idea, right? After we spent $5 million. In this world, it's, hey, we have an idea. What's the smallest thing we could build that's an experiment that we could put in the market, that we could test and validate our idea before we spend more money? And that would validate, okay, let's go spend, a couple $100,000, again, investment, let's invest, and then let's learn some more and keep making a choice of, should we persevere? Should we keep investing and building? And maybe we never spend the $5 million, or, we fail earlier. We opt out because we realize it's a bad idea, or we deliver enough value at 3 million and we stop, right? Like those types of things. But in order to be adaptable and sense and respond, we got to be able to deliver quickly. In order to deliver quickly, we got to get the variability out, right? So we've got to manage this change, and manage the change journey. And just because you want to get to adapt doesn't mean you can go from 0 miles an hour to 100 miles an hour overnight. You got to figure out, okay, what are the foundational elements we need to do to get from 0 to 20, and then from 20 to 40, and 40 to 60. And then even some of the things we implement at 60 to 80 may be unwinding some of the things we implemented at 0 to 20. And that's okay, right? Like we had training wheels. We don't need the training wheels anymore once we get up here, right? But we've got to manage this journey, and we've got to figure out, where are we, and then figure out what are our next steps. Right, and that's what we're trying to do with Path to Agility, is help. We also have to look at things at multiple levels within the organization. So the easiest one, remember I mentioned team level agility. Like we've been doing this for, over 10 years, right? We're good at team level agility. We can, there's lots of books, there's lots of information, there's lots of expertise in the world about how to do Scrum at a team level. What we've been learning over the last 5 years as an industry is, how do we do it at the system level, right? How do we get good? And now we have things like SAFe and LESS and, lots of frameworks. And so we've got a lot of options now at how to do things at a system level. And we've got to, apply those practices there. Then system is about optimizing the flow of value delivery through the system, right? A system of teams. The place where we're still the weakest, I guess, as an industry, is we've got lots of different things around what we need to do, but organizationally, how does this impact our finance practices? How does this impact our HR practices? How's this tie into strategy? How do we shift leadership behavior if we want to do that, right? So we've got lots of different things that are out there. Like even you take like Lencioni, or you take David Marquet's work, or take all these different things, but it's not as codified. And so that, remember I said the next frontier is business agility at the organizational level, and that's kind of, to me, the next frontier, and where we're going to start to see more stuff kind of codified in that way for the organization. There's answers. They're just not in a nice little packaged bow as much as they are in some of the other pieces. So we've got to look at that all three layers, right? We can't just do organization. We can't just do system. We can't just do team. And we need to think about that. And many transformations I see, remember, used to be all team. Now I see most of them are mostly system, right? And they're missing the org, and they're maybe not emphasizing enough at the team level, right? You can't scale to the system level if the teams aren't functioning well either, right? So you've got to be able to do both of those things. All right, number 5. So number 5 is that this, most of Agile transformations are technology initiatives, though we have seen more and more things that are outside of technology, marketing and other parts of the organization. But even if wherever you are, right, you can't just do it on your own, right? The technology group, it's not just a technology transformation, it impacts the whole organization, right? It impacts things like HR and finance. It impacts the business. It impacts marketing. It impacts from an executive and a planning perspective, right? We've got to think about all of these different impacts from our like external stakeholders or our downstream consumers, right? Or where the money's coming from, or, hey, we want to do all this good teaming stuff in Agile, but if our HR practices are a stack rank, system, or our bonus structure that our executives have defined is counterproductive to team accountability, right? Like those types of things could just make an agile transformation just stall right out, right? Because they're counterproductive types of behaviors, right? So we've got to think about how everybody is impacted in the organization, and can't just focus on our own organization, even though that's maybe where most of the lift is and most of where we need to start. And so I know a lot of technology leaders that say, hey, look, if you want to take your team and you want to start doing more agile work, well, you've got to get your business stakeholders on board, and if they're not on board, then that's a precondition to us investing in helping you, right? Getting the business, who's your customer, right, involved is really critical. So you got to think about the whole pie, right? All of the different pieces. And then the last one is number 6 here. We talk about building the internal coaching capability. This is never going to be done, right? It's about continuous evolution. It's about continuous improvement. And so you've got to build your internal capabilities of an organization. Like Agile Velocity, we pride ourselves on our job is to work ourselves out of a job. And the first thing we do when we get on site is we talk to our sponsor about, okay, where are your coaches, right? Where are your employee coaches? Who can we start bringing along with us to every meeting we're going to, that we can start coaching up, so that we can start offloading our getting their skills up, so we can start offloading to them, right? Because when we think about the different transformation options that organizations are looking at, these are the big 4 that I see happening as a pattern. So either companies and teams that are we'll just figure it out ourselves, right? That's the do it yourself. And I'm going to kind of compare these. Or there's more and more the big consulting organizations are saying, well, we do big transformations, so we can do agile transformations. Or there's what I call coaching augmentation companies. So think about it as it's just staff aug for coaches. You need a coach, we got a coach. We got a coach, and I'll send a coach out there, and they're going to do smart things, right? And you may get a good coach, you may not get a good coach, but the biggest problem is when you start to scale, right? Are those coaches in alignment, right? And then there's companies that I feel like that are like us, that are more focused on, this is all we do, right? It's about being an agile consultancy, agile experts around that. And so the things to consider, right, is when you think about the transformation options of from a cost perspective, surely do it yourself can be cheaper from a short-term perspective, and coaching augmentation may be the cheaper option as well. But from an expertise, right, do it yourself, you don't have the expertise yet, so you're developing it. So it could take longer, right? I realized a long time ago, our job as coaches, I thought, like, what's the value of a coach, right? So somewhere along this 10-year journey, I realized, like, the value of our coach is to accelerate people through the learning curve, right? And reduce the risk of how deep they go, right? So you want to make sure you're getting the right level of expertise to support to get through it quicker. And do folks have a consistent kind of proven approach to helping guide transformation, right, is a very critical component. And then are you developing self-sufficiency, right? And so do it yourself is definitely, the strongest there, but it ultimately is your partner helping you build that self-sufficiency? Time frame, how long is it going to take, right? Again, do it yourself. You might eventually get there, right? But it's just more than likely going to take longer because you're going through more learning cycles on your own, which can have some value. And then 5th is, or the last one here is really like what's ultimately kind of the long-term success, right? Like where have we seen the stronger patterns of that? And so these are all things to kind of think about in terms of, how you're approaching from a transformation and kind of, guiding that transformation. And ultimately, again, the most important thing is, are you building self-sufficiency within your organization and building that internal coaching capability for your organization? All right, so I'm going to open it up to Q&A. There is a little Q&A button down at the bottom. I see one question that came in of the slides. Yeah, so we'll send a link to all of this stuff and a recording to everybody that's signed up for the webinar afterwards. But feel free to hit the Q&A button, and I'm happy to answer any questions. While you're doing that, I'm gonna share with you a workshop that's coming up that's all about kind of leading transformational change. So this is happening on October 22nd. You can find out more on either agilevelocity.com or pathtoagility.com, and I'm sure Rachel will actually send the link to this in the follow-up information as well. But this will go through the Path to Agility framework. It'll license you to use the Path to Agility framework, certify you on that in this one-day workshop. But it all is about talking more deeply about these challenges and how do we overcome them. So if you're interested in this type of content and want to attend a workshop for that, that's coming up on October 22nd, and you can use that code to get 20% off the class. All right, I see a question that came in. It says you can't scale. You mentioned you can't scale to the system level if the teams aren't doing well. Doesn't that go the other way? If the system isn't what it needs, then the teams will run into roadblocks. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's definitely a kind of chicken and egg problem there. However, I would say that you can get some success doing things at a team level. You're just going to hit a ceiling, right? And then you're going to hit system level impediments. I think it's, let me make sure, I'll make the statement, and I'm pretty confident in it as I think about it, right? Like, I don't think you can do much at the system without teams, right? So I think system is definitely dependent on teams, right? If you don't have teams doing Agile, you can't really like scale. But I could have some success with a team without the system fully optimized, but I will hit a ceiling and I'm not going to get, you know, all the benefits, right? And more importantly, if I'm optimizing, say, I don't even have feature teams, right? Then I totally would say, yeah, don't optimize like the front end team and the back end team, and you're not creating a cross-functional team, because optimizing locally could be sub-optimizing the whole. So yes, if you're not optimizing the system, you know, in that regard, and moving people around to optimize, then that could cause some constraints as well. What other questions do folks have on anything transformation related? Looks like Rachel's posted a link to the workshop in the chat if you're interested in that. Easy link. All right, Woody's got a question here. So over the years, you have been using an outcome-based approach. Have you found the success rate increases of Agile transformations you've been leading, and by how much? So by how much is hard to measure, right? Because you know, you don't have like a before and an after like that. We would have like the data to say like, well, you know, this group did it without outcomes based and this group did it with outcomes based, and you don't have like that test sample size, you know, or whatever, test group kind of thing. So the how much is hard to measure, but what I can tell you is like where I've seen a difference from how we were doing it before and not. The first thing is that I feel like the energy, well, since people are oriented around the right things, right, with outcomes, the energy doesn't wane, and it can sustain through the journey, right? So we talk about, you know, you start off and things get like worse, right? And like you get down here and it gets very tenuous, stressful. People are unsure. They don't understand the new rules. And if you don't understand why, and it gets down here and everything's difficult, then you're gonna be like, I'm just gonna head back, or like it stalls out, or you know, like we would see it in kind of manifest in like, well, we did the first statement of work, but you know, we don't really see the need to do the second statement of work. And it's like, you got so much more that you need to do. But since we've been outcomes based, then you're measuring success based on, all right, have we shortened cycle time, right? And nobody can argue that like we shouldn't deliver faster. Like if you deliver, it takes 3 months to deliver, like we shouldn't deliver faster, or we shouldn't get more value to our customer. We can argue all day long, should we use story points or, you know, the how kind of things. But so we've seen less argument about the why when it's a really purposeful why, and we see more orientation and more excitement for trying to achieve that, which then means more energy for the transformation, which means more perseverance through. And so I would say that since we've been using outcomes-based approach, we've seen more teams and systems and orgs get to the other side of the trough, if you will, than before, where things would just, you know, stall out, right? I think that's probably the most, you know, measurable kind of aspect of that. All right, Karen's got a question here. I don't hear many organizations like yours advocating organizational change management. When did Agile Velocity integrate OCM? What were the triggers and what were the differences the integration has made? That's a good question. When did we start doing things like that? I mean, it's probably about 5 years ago is when we really started making that part of even our, you know, one of the first things we do is like a leadership boot camp, and leading change is part of that. And that probably was about somewhere in 2014, 2015 timeframe. You know, I also, somewhere around there, I talked to a gentleman, I don't know if I was interviewing him or just, you know, got networking with somebody that was running a similar Agile consultancy up in Chicago area. And he was like, I've got a organizational change management person on my team. I've got an executive coach on my team. And I was like, oh, that makes total sense. Not to just have, a lot of times we have these like Agile coach generalists and like, we can do anything. And so like, there was just things that happened, you know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago where I was like, okay, yeah, there's this piece. So, and then the second part of the question of like the differences, I think it's helped, and part of what we do is then build, like, you know, Cotter would say, like the guiding coalition we call Agile leadership team. And so having that dynamic of a team that owns the transformation, is building a transformation backlog, is using Agile to run the transformation, right? Those types of constructs has then made it where there's clear ownership, so therefore it's being driven, right? Like somebody's going to make it happen. And I think that's the biggest piece, is having that guiding coalition who has now ownership of the change journey, versus just saying like, well, all the leaders have ownership, right? Then there's no ownership, right? Like there's too many people for that to pass, so it doesn't create focus. And I think that has probably been the biggest impact, is then somebody, and then that impact becomes communication is better about the why. Everybody understands what it's all about. There's a team that's removing organizational impediments faster, right? You know, like all those types of dynamics that start to come into play, are things that we've seen there. Good questions. Anything else that's popping up? We're getting close to time, and thanks for joining us today on our webinar. Thanks a lot.